So thank you for having me. I'm quite happy to be here on stage. That's my fourth time at 44Con, and I thought, yeah, for once I should come, I should submit something and be on the stage to present. So here I am with hunting for bugs, catching dragons. So my name is Nico. I'm French. I work for Microsoft Security Response Center in Cheltenham, and I'm part of the vulnerability and mitigation team. I'm very sorry to look like a zombie. I just have a baby with dirty fingers, and I'm learning to be a daddy the hard way. So sorry, I try to do my best. Hopefully there won't be an issue. Yes. So I'm going to talk about exploits and bugs for affecting Outlook and Exchange. So I start with Outlook first. So first part of this presentation will be focused on Outlook. I expect it to last around for 35 minutes, and then I spend another 10 minutes on Exchange. So for those of you who have no idea of exploits in emails, I hope you learned something in this presentation. For those of you who already have practiced a bit, I hope you still learn something. And for those of you who had already exploited these applications, well, you and I should talk after that talk because I don't know you. So I assume that you guys are not very familiar with Outlook exploits. So I just show you something, just a short demo. So try to think about it. According to you, what's the worst case for Outlook? It's an exploit affecting Outlook. What would be the worst case? You think, I believe, like something like the preview pane. You send and you got an email, and then you get it on the preview pane, and then something happened and cat pops. Well, look at this one. You don't even need the preview pane to be on. You just receive an email and your client gets on. That's one of the worst issues I've ever seen in my career. This one is quite bad, so I'm not going to talk about it, but instead I will show other issues. So no, let's pretend that this never happened. Let's pretend that you haven't seen that. Try to think about these exploits affecting mail clients. When I think about it, I believe that the first thing that come to my mind are those worms that we saw in the early 2000s, like typically I love you. You'd get an email with a VB script attachment, you double click it, and then sorry, there are so many people in that room. And then it would just spread and spread again. There was one other, I think 1997, the name of that virus was CAC, and this one was spreading with a JavaScript signature. So you would send an email with a JavaScript signature, and then it would just run JavaScript code, and then auto-spread. And that was quite a nice exploit as well. But now think something more recently. So we had Heifeli, a good friend of mine. He reported us an exploit that he named Badwin Mail in late 2015. So basically, he managed to find a way to build an email containing a Flash object, and with a known Flash vulnerability, he managed to get RC on this. There's also that person, Ryan Hansen. So you know, it's one day at the MSRC where I'm checking the queue, and suddenly I see 3 emails from somebody that I don't know. 3 emails reporting bugs in Microsoft Outlook, and I'm reading the quick notes. I'm like, if only half of this is true, then it's really bad. It turns out that this guy was great, and everything he said was true. So this day we got 3 amazing vulnerabilities. And then there is the last class of issues. There is those where we see the exploit and we just don't know that Outlook is affected. I'm thinking, for example, about the exploits that we saw in the wild targeting Word about 2-3 years ago. So the attackers there were attacking people using Word with some fonts, so sending a document with a malicious font. The thing is that nobody never realized that this also applied to Outlook. So that leads us to the attack surface of Outlook. It's quite big, to be honest. Think first about emails. So anything that is present in an email, it can be like the formatting, like HTML, can be fonts somebody in an email, can be pictures, can be links, attachments, of course, don't want to double click them, can be calendars, can be all sorts of things. There are also protocols, obviously, SMTP, POP3, the Exchange Active Sync one. There used to be an NTP, but I think this one is gone. Also, all the issues that relate to spoofing, like fraud with certificates, like anything that has to do with the identities, etc., etc. And obviously, well, all the remainings, like we are dealing with an Office application, so think about macros. Think, for example, about a scenario where you'd get an email, and that email would execute macros. Well, I've never seen that, and I hope that this does not exist, but just have this in mind. Also, think about SansPost, their rulers attack. So this was assuming that they had the control of a box of a mailbox, and they were trying to leverage that to get code execution on the client. So obviously, I just have 45 minutes here, so I'm not going to talk about everything. I'll just talk about the rich text format, some Joly objects, some attachments, and of course TNEF and IP properties. Before I dive in, why this talk? So I told you I'm working for Microsoft, so you might be thinking, this guy, he says he's from Microsoft and he's going to teach us how to hack Outlook. Right. Well, yes, but that's not the point. The point is that there are all these exploits out there, and we don't know them. Occasionally, we only receive good reports of vulnerabilities, but that's very occasionally. 2 days ago, there was Patch Tuesday. One bug was fixed. I believe this one was interesting, but there are all the others. So from time to time, I'm bumping into someone and you say, "Oh, Nico, yeah, last Patch Tuesday you killed 3 of my bugs." That's too bad because theirs were good. Sorry for you, man. How do I kill the others? So why are people not reporting to us? Is it because it's too difficult? Well, yeah, possibly. I mean, you don't have scripting engines in Des Mail client. It's not like you're attacking a browser. It's not like you've got that memory corruption that you're going to be able to leverage easily to get your exploit. It's more difficult than that. Why else? Perhaps because there's no symbols for Office. Yeah, sorry, this I cannot help you. But still, there are some good offers around there. For example, our friends at Tipping Point, they are offering these nice bounties on Exchange and Outlook, 200K for Outlook, 250 for Exchange. Zerodium also is giving the same amount, 250 for Exchange or Outlook. So there is some room for research. How can we help or find us? Let's just talk about war and research and things that we've seen. So that's why I will be presenting things I've seen myself and things that people have been reporting us. And obviously, quick disclaimer, everything that is mentioned here has obviously been fixed before. So where shall we start? I borrowed that slide from a Hayface presentation at CanTech 2 years ago. So when you start looking for Outlook features, you quickly figure that there is something called TNEF emails. And when you Google that, I think that the first link that you see is a page from Microsoft describing the TNEF format. And among all the things that are said on this page, there is this. It's just a container for Outlook special features. And this is exactly what we are after. We're after these features that give you remote code execution. So what's a TNEF email? So just a container, basically. So you've got your client and you select, you can choose the format of your email, either HTML, plain text, or rich text format. You choose rich text format, you send it. And then on the other side, you get this email, for example. You check on the server, and there is that thing, meme headers, and then some content. You see application mstnef, and you wonder what it is, something encoded in base64. You decode that, and then there's this dataverse, just like a file with some binaries. So obviously, what is this? So as with most of Microsoft formats, this one is publicly documented. It's quite easy to follow. So just roughly just a sequence of objects and attributes that are in a file, basically. So for this research, I built a no-1-0 template. So I've been asked if this thing was public. So it's not public, but I've got a deal for you. You send me a good bug, and I published it, and in turn you'll get also a nice blog post, right? So there is often a confusion between PNEF and RTF. So when you send that email in a rich text format, you might have the feeling that you're just sending an RTF document. It's partly true. You're sending that RTF document, but it's actually embedded in the TNF container. So there, you're saying this RTF along with many other properties. This RTF document is embedded in that PR RTF compressed properties. Various encodings. First one is the one by default, the compressed one, so a custom LZMA encoding. And the other one is something that you normally don't see, because I don't believe that with the UI it's possible to send as emails. So Mela, just a plain text email. Sorry. Usually, occasionally, we get cases where our finder have been fuzzing, or finders have been fuzzing the MSG file format, and most of the time, it's this is just because they fuzzed the compressed part and managed to trigger some random memory corruption. Well, most of the time, this is going to fail because the parser is quite pedantic. So if you want to fuzz this part, just use, for example, the Outlook interrupt library. It will help you just select your RTF file and send it on the wire. So it's much easier, and it will just give you much false positives than just fuzzing the bits with like a shotgun, like typically things that we see. It still works because we are still fixing those cases. I think there was one fixed about a month ago, but most of the time it won't give you any results. So now let's talk about some examples of issues that we've seen affecting Outlook. So when I'm talking about RTF, I'm also talking about Word, because Outlook uses a Word core library to parse those RTF emails. So anything that affects that Word parser, that Word RTF parser, might also affect Outlook. That's why occasionally, when there is an issue affecting the RTF file format, you will see that the bulletin that we published are critical and not important. It's because most of the time this code can also be reached from Outlook and the preview pane. So now think about the RTF specifications. There might be things that shouldn't be found in Outlook, but should still be found in Word. And that leads me to the template keyword. I didn't find that one. Ryan Hansen did. So what did he figure out? So it was 2017, I think. He found a way. He figured out that it was possible to send an email in RTF that has this template keyword in it, and then you would point that template somewhere, for example, on either on the web, like with HTTP, or on a remote share, and then in that template you would embed a Flash object. And so he figured out that even if hey-face bad windmail had been fixed, there was still a path, one possible way to get code execution with Flash. And he was true, because if you look at the code, you can see that we fixed the way that Outlook was supposed to instantiate objects, but we didn't realize that it was also possible to get the same behavior using templates. And so that was embarrassing. But there's not only the problem with these objects. Think about the template keywords. You can just put whatever you want here. Like, for example, a link on a web share, and then you guys like it. Getting the NTLM hash, for example, and then that's an easy win. There's also a fact that in that case you just extend the attack surface. Suddenly you're able to have Outlook load every binary format that Word supports, XML, HTML, the legacy binary formats, everything. So just all of a sudden, everything that affects Word also affects Outlook. So which means that that's very bad. Another issue affecting this template, this one I found it myself. So say that you've got a document that is linked to a template, and this template points to another template with the same name, but for some reason this template isn't accessible. For example, it's hosted on a remote share, and then you don't have the access to go to that share. So that will just trigger a nice use after free in Outlook. Or Word. Can you exploit that? It's probably complicated, but well, as you can guess, there are lots of issues affecting the template keyword. And so what do you think happened there? Yeah. For once, we just remove the feature. It's not something that we often see. Usually, the teams try to fix the issue, but there are cases where we just remove the feature because, it doesn't need to be there. I come back now to the Outlook interrupt library. So if you like C#, it's probably the easiest way to build an email. So look at this piece of code. There is something here called the message class property. So by the way, everything here is properly documented. So just go on Microsoft website and you'll find all the documentation there. So look at this message class. It said IPM contact. So what is that exactly? If you send this email, and if you receive it on the Outlook side, you will get this. Instead of having your email with your text, you will see the contact form. Because it's possible with Outlook and with the TNF format to send basically whatever forms that Outlook support on a wire. So there are like contact forms, calendars, tasks, many of them. And what's interesting is that each of these forms has its own properties and its own code. For example, this one, on the top right corner, there is a picture. And you're going to say, yeah, but what's the benefit of this? Because if you send an email, you can already include pictures. That's true. But the thing is, here, Outlook is not using the standard path to parse that picture. Instead, it's using the GDI or GDI plus stack. Instead of just the Office stack, which means that if you've got a vulnerability or an exploit affecting the GDI stack in Windows, then you might also be able to use it here in that email. There are other things specific to those properties, but be aware that when you do that, there might be hidden features that you might be able to exploit. So as I said, there are all these message classes, and more can be found on that website. There are even some that are not documented, but you guys are reversers, so you know how to find them. Just look for strings in the binary. Let's talk about issues now affecting these classes. So we received that one, I think it was summer 2016, something like that. So Etienne Stallman, he reported an email using the IPM remote class. And this was triggering just a null pointer in the preview pane. So for bugs like this, we are not going to issue a CVE because they don't qualify for a bar. So this is just a moderate issue. But still, it's still interesting because at least it shows some hidden behavior, things that shouldn't happen. And still, it made it up to this presentation today. So thanks, Etienne. I'm going now to spend more time now talking about the IPM document classes. So this one again was submitted to us by Ryan Hansen. So imagine an email where you have two attachments, two Word documents attached. So one is a normal RTF file, and the other one is that IPM document things. When you open the first one, the first attachment, you'll see Word pop up, but Word will pop up in protected mode, in protected view. So this is fine. However, in the other one, protected view won't be started, and you will have Word just popping in medium integrity. So which means that the sandbox is now gone. And there is also that other case, sending emails and having Office documents running without user interaction. So I'm going to just quickly, if you want to try, that's a POC. I'm going to show you a demo of these two cases combined. So say that you send an email, and instead of just having some text, you've got Word that shows up in the preview pane. That's fine. So this one is running in app container. So productive view is correctly open, is correctly starting, and that's fine. Now, what do you think happen if you double click that email? Then something else is going to happen. Word will show up, but this time using the COM automation. And if you look at it, you'll see that productive view is now gone. You guys are reversers, so you're a bit curious of how this works. So I've got another demo for you. This is all about COM stuff. And if you look at the code, you'll see that Word was launched in the first demo with automation because at some point there is a class ID says that, yeah, that's a Word document. But what happens if you send another class ID, like typically the equation editor class ID? So remember, about 2 years ago, we had this exploit involving the equation editor. It was just possible to trigger that in Outlook, but not with 0 click, just 1 click away. So be aware that when there are exploits like this that affect Word, sometimes it's also possible to have them work on Outlook. All right, I'm now going to move slowly to all the objects. But first, let me talk about the other file format that Outlook supports. So I've just been talking about the email format, basically .eml. There is another one that Outlook supports, the message format. Several ways to generate these files. For example, copy-paste from the client to the desktop, or you can also use the interrupt library to just generate that. This one is good in a way that it will give you everything that has been generated in that code. If you do the copy-paste from Outlook client to desktop, sometimes you're losing some information. So bear that in mind. So when you do that, and when you try to open this message format, you'll see that this is actually an array storage that you have, so just not a random binary file. An array storage consisting of streams and stub storage. Notice, for example, the property version 1.0 top stream. I come back to it in a second. MAPI properties. MAPI properties are essentially described by three different properties. So the first one is the PID. So here, for example, 1A or 1F. It's also described by its type. Here, 1F for a Unicode string, and its value. So here, IPM.text. So the types follow the Windows variant types, so it's very easy to read them. 3 for an integer, 5 for a float, etc., etc., etc. So what's the relationship between the email file format and the message file format? Look at the properties, the first stream, so property version stream. And you'll see, for example, this property. So everything in that stream is encoded on 16 bytes. So, for example, for this property, which is an integer, you'll see the value at offset +8. So here, just a sequence of zeros. For this one, which is a string, and its size is set to 12, So obviously there's not enough room for it to be contained in that stream. So Outlook will just create another stream for you. So if you want to fuzz this file format, just be aware of these specificities, because otherwise you will just hit the parsers and it will just render nothing. So you will just lose your time. Let's come now to the Joly object. So from high-phase research, we know that it's unfortunately possible to embed some objects in an email. For example, these objects, if you follow the Windows variant types, they can be they can end either with 09 or 0D. So in Outlook, they all end with 0D. So here, you've got this property, which I forgot, something 3701 OD, which means that you've got an substorage, an object, and some other substorages or other streams in it. And this is interesting in this research because when you're dealing with Joly objects, you're dealing with all the functions that are in Joly 32. So I appreciate that you don't have the symbols for Office, but you do have those for Windows. And if you're curious, you can just put your breakpoints on the usual suspects. Essentially here, read message class, Joly open storage, or even Joly load. And if you do that, you realize quickly that there are, I think, 3 class IDs that are handled differently in Outlook. First ones are for the meta files. I think one is for bitmap pictures, and the last one is for the Joly standard link. Now you see where I'm going. Back, I think, 2 years ago, we saw all these exploits involving communicators. Most of them were just embedded in Word documents or Excel documents. I don't believe that anybody noticed that it was also possible to trigger the same attacks in Outlook, unfortunately. So the attacks that I'm now going to show you are all coming from these communicators. So just if you look a bit at the code, you'll see that from Joly load, once you've modified the 01 Joly stream, you are able to hit this code, read moniker stream, which in the end just called Joly load from stream. And if you look at the documentation, this is just about reading an object from a stream and instantiate it on the iPersistStream interface. How do we exploit that? Will Dorman, I think, was the first one to report that behavior to us. So 3 years ago, maybe he noticed that if we use Outlook 97 or maybe Outlook 2000, it was possible to send an email with a link to an object. And in that link, you would specify a path on a remote share, for example. And he noticed that if you do that, when the victim would open that email in his Outlook client, then with Wireshark, you could see some traffic going to that web share, and then the IP address along with, for example, the NTLM hash would be leaked. And so he was worried about this, and that was a legitimate worry. And then he figured out that if you even have an SMB vulnerabilities, it was also possible to trigger it just with it. So I'm talking about SMB client vulnerabilities. So his attack here was just you send an email, and then this email is going to just blue screen your box. That's annoying. It's not an RC, but still it's annoying. There is more that you can do with the file moniker. If you've ever reversed it, there is that function that is called at some point a restore shell link. So what is that thing doing? You know about the Windows shortcuts? It's actually possible to embed them in these file monikers. And it say that you've got a vulnerability affecting the Windows shortcuts, and that still happened. One was corrected 2 days ago. It's definitely possible to trigger it in Outlook. So is it possible to load a remote library with it, like we saw with StockNet? I don't know, I haven't tried, but I'm assuming that potentially it is. Just to say that there are always things hidden here and there that might be able to to trigger on Outlook. So give me a second. I'm not going to talk about another moniker, the objref one. So I did that research about 3 years ago, summer 2016. And at that time, I didn't know about the other monikers, like the new moniker, the Q monikers, like everything that has been exploited in 2017, 2018. I didn't know about that, but I'm glad I followed that one. So what's that one? This one is just about unmarshalling objects that have been marshaled with a trusted marshaller. How do you exploit that? How do you, you know that you can send an email and this email will just unmarshal a COM object, but still, how do you get code execution from this? So first step, you're going to call co-unmarshal interface with something that has been, that is trusted. So there is a list of trusted marshallers, not so many of them, I think 15. So it's quite easy to look them all and potentially find some bugs. So the first component that I noticed was this one, affecting the vid control library. And this one was interesting because when you look at the code, so this is a code that is triggered when you open a stream. And so you see there is a loop that takes a counter, and then it's going to take like COM objects from the stream, instantiate them, and then initialize them on the hypersys stream init interface. And that init interface is important. It's different than the normal hypersys stream init. It's different than the normal hypersys stream interface. If you've done some browser research, you know, for example, that Flash starts with this interface. So at that point, I know I had an email and I was able to trigger Flash. So I could get remote code execution with Flash. And then, so this was summer 2016. So I had been at Microsoft for about 9 months. And somebody told me, Nico, so now you're at Microsoft, you need to leave Flash alone and forget about it. There is enough for you to do at Microsoft. All right, fair enough. So I had to find something else. So there are not that many controls starting with the hypersys stream init. So I just tried them all, and I noticed that for this one, the XML feed moniker, if you were giving it some HTML, it would just load it and load the scripts that were contained. So that's it. At that moment, I had an email that was able to instantiate some VB scripts. It was not enough because I was still locked inside VB. I couldn't, like, for example, instantiate the file system object and write to files. So I still have to find something else. I just used a VB 0-day because, well, you know, there are some. But more interestingly, what was fixed with these attacks? So first, everything that had to do with that vid control. So this was a trusted marshaller, and it was very, very important, crucial that everything that was on Marshall with that library was trusted. There were at least 3 CVs on this. Do some research, maybe you can find others. Hopefully not. The XML feed monitor and the objref, I'm glad that I did that research because then we added them to the COM activation filter in Office. So now it's not possible to load these COM objects anymore. It might still be possible to load the objref in Visio because I think there is one weird use case, but that's another story. For all the other applications, this is now gone. Do not load all the objects in the pane. I didn't put the preview pane here. I'm just talking about the panes in Outlook in general. Because when you get an email and you reply to or you forward it, then that's another pane that is going to show up. And so at some point, I had a case where it was possible to get code execution just by hitting reply to that email. So you wouldn't get code execution. That bug wouldn't trigger when you were reading the email, but if you reply to, then yes, you would be on by it. Fixed another VB script bug, yeah. But more importantly now, it's not possible to load VB script anymore, at least on the recent branches. And then something quite cool. And if restrict objects loaded by the diagnostic service. And if you follow that presentation so far, you should be like, what is he talking about? Think about that attack. It's not only affecting Outlook, it's affecting all the COM objects in general, or all the objects that are marshaled in Windows. Windows is just about objects sent from one application to another. And if you can abuse this marshaler, this trusted marshaler, then you can do crazy things with this. Think about variants and safe arrays. Safe arrays, for example, just an array containing different type of variants. When you're creating your application and you're using a safe array, you don't specify the type on the safe array. You can do some check later, but when you use a safe array, it's a generic array. It can contain whatever. So think about a case where you would, for example, load a safe array containing strings. So you would have your strings marshaled in that safe array, and then on the other side, the code would just see that there's some string in the safe array and then unmarshal everything. So now think about what would happen if you, instead of giving strings, you would give objects. Exactly the same. These objects would be unserialized for you. And so if you think about it, and if you can find an application that works on RPC and that supports these safe arrays, you've already won. For example, think about this one, the diagnostic service. I didn't know about that service at first. I think I learned from it at .1 2016, that South Korean guy, Lucky Heart, he managed to exploit, I think it was IE at that point, or was it Edge? I don't remember. He managed to exploit it just by having his own library loaded by a system service. And when you look at it, you're like, how am I supposed to know that these things exist? It wasn't that trivial. I mean, there were some restrictions. It wasn't possible just to load a library. You needed to bypass some checks, but still, that's what he managed to do. And usually, it's not possible to do anything with that service. But I'm not looking at things that I can do with that service. I was just looking for functions exported by this service. And there was one, so get draft data updates. That was exactly what I was looking for. Because here, this function takes in parameter a safe array. And I think this was a safe array of string. Yeah, if you look at the prototype, you see counter ID as bstring. So here the code is just waiting for strings. But what happens if you send objects instead? Well, the code will just unmarshal them for you. And once you're in that function and it's checking if you've already actually provided some string, it's already too late. Your objects have already been marshaled. I've got a demo for you showing that. So you just receive an email, and then magic will happen in a preview plan. You click it, and then stuff happens in the background, and you get on, and then you system payload. These attacks work, and not just only here for the purpose of that demo. They are quite reliable, and I'm definitely looking for them. This is what I call a dragon, by the way. So that's it for Outlook. I'm now going to talk about Exchange. So what I find difficult these days when I start a new project, so basically when I want to attack a product, is how do I do that? What was previously done? How can I get some ideas from what was previously done? Can I get some inspiration? Because usually I just don't know the target. And so for Exchange, when I looked at it, I just looked at what had been done before, and unfortunately there was not much. There was that exploit that we saw from the shadow brokers, the exploit called Englishman Dentist. What was it about? This was about sending an email to Exchange 2003 on Windows Server 2003, and then when you would view that email in Outlook Web Apps, it would reach a point where you could download, you could force the code on the server to download a picture encoded in a Mac format, and then there was a Stack Overflow issue with the library parsing it, and then you would get code execution there. But this is Exchange 2003 on Windows 2003. How can I get this attack to work on Exchange 2019, for example? Another issue that was interesting, so this was submitted to us by ZDI. So it's not really about emails, but it's more about you already have control on a box, and you leave a voicemail, and you play with the MAPI properties, and then you'll get .NET deserialization, and it will just unmarshal some code for you, and then you get RC on the server. That's not exactly what I'm looking after, but when you look at what has been done before in the past for Exchange, this is what you'll see. So definitely not much. So also think about the scenarios. What are we looking for? How are we attacking that? Are we unauthenticated? Or do we already have some creds on the system? What sort of attack are we trying to do? Are we trying XSSs in OWA? Are we trying memory corruptions? Think also that these days Exchange is essentially a .NET application. Is it really a .NET application? Look at the components there. There is that one, XRPC32. I'll come back to it in a second. But some tools essential for this research, MFC MAPI. This one is just about opening your inbox, and looking at all the emails, all the objects that are in that inbox. And the amount of things that you can do with this tool is just huge. You can, one thing that I really liked is that you were able to drop literally everything, drop it in a TNDF format, and then that would give you some MAPI properties that Outlook was unable to generate, for example. And I found some bugs just by replaying these MAPI properties in emails. And this was really cool. If you do some research like this, bear that in mind, because there are things here that are very worth it. XRPC now. So as I said, Exchange is mostly just a huge .NET application, but there are still a couple of binaries here and there that are coded in C or C++. XRPC is one of them. When I looked at it initially, I've got the source code. So I first looked at the source code, and then I started IDA also, just to have an idea of what was going on. And I noticed some functions that were directly working on the MAPI properties taken from an email. Is there some bug left here? Let's see. So look at, for example, this EC parse entry ID function. You see that there's, if you look at it in IDA, you'll see that there's a huge function which dispatches to other functions depending on the MAPI properties. And usually you've got some code that ensures that the MAPI property you've submitted is of a valid type. So for example, here, either a string or a Unicode string. But there were two cases where these checks were not done. This one, for example. So here we would just, this function was supposed to take a byte array, but you could instead submit anything, like for example, a float. So what would happen here is just a null difference in the delivery process. Can you exploit that? Probably not, because of the way variants are encoded on 64 bits. It was probably just those at worst. But I'd love to be proven wrong here. So if you've got some time and want to do some research, have a look at it. It's interesting. There was that other case, EC make fiddle from FEL. So when I looked at this function, I didn't see the check at first, the check for the property, the type of property. It turns out that check is not done above in the calling function, but it's done in that function itself. So there was no possibility for type confusion here. But then I looked at the code, and I noticed that with IDA, not looking at the source code. It was possible at some point to write a bit to the buffer that was submitted, the buffer that came from that email. So in particular conditions, it was possible just to go out of the bound by 1 bit. That sounds cool. that's typically the kind of issue that you'd be able to exploit in a browser. So how much time do I have? Yeah, probably two minutes left. So what do you think I did? Something crazy, right? I did nothing. It was too hard. I think I spent about 2 weeks there trying to figure out a way to exploit that. I couldn't find anything, essentially because of the way the heap works in .NET and in this application. Is it possible to exploit it? I doubt it. But again, feel free to do some research and prove me wrong. I want now to mention quickly something else. So there was a bug that was fixed about 3 months ago in Exchange, and some people on Twitter asked me what it was about. I told them I will talk about that later. I'm talking about it now. Think about OWA, no, because I haven't talked about that. Office Web Apps. So that's a client that's supposed to run in your web server, in your browser. So there are obviously functionalities, features that are not available there, but some of them are still available. And for example, if you send an RTF email containing objects, there's only objects obviously won't be rendered in your browser, but there still be things that will be rendered. Like for example, pictures. So say that you've got your only object, and then there is an image that is encoded with this only object. And something there on that server must be extracting that picture for you. So I looked a bit at the code, and so everything is done in OLI32. So you've got the symbols, so you can look at it. And it turns out that various picture formats were accepted. So usually it's WMF, but it was also possible to specify an EMF picture. And when I saw that, I figured, oh, this must be bad, because there are so many things that you can do with EMF. And so this was exactly what this advisory was about. Do not load EMF pictures on the server side. So I got one last demo for you, where I'm just sending an email, and then my victim just open it in OWA, and then that will just blue screen the Exchange server. You like it, right? I liked it too. So to conclude, just a few things about that research. I didn't manage to get code execution on Exchange, although I tried things. I wasn't successful. I wanted to get something unauthenticated. I found some bugs that were more interesting, but you needed to be authenticated. I didn't try to exploit them. Unfortunately, for those that I found, I don't believe they were exploitable. But what can you guys found? That's what I'm interested in to see. Some references, if you want to check that. The slides are online, and thank you all. Thank you for your attention.